Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 2233. The topic is training, and the title is Overtraining versus Under Recovery. One of my personal training clients, we were talking this week about their programming for their clients. And one of the factors they're trying to balance is, are they asking their clients to do too much? This client of mine is a very type A personality, just crushes everything in life. She doesn't miss a beat. She knows her clients aren't going to necessarily be the same, but she wonders, if I don't ask of them enough, they're not going to get great results. They're going to be unhappy, and then they're going to, leave me as a trainer. But more importantly, they're just not going to get great results. She cares more that they're happy overall. But it's not a good business practice to have people not get what they want because they're going to leave. She said, but it's like, okay, if I push them too hard, they're going to burn out, they're going to get frustrated, and they'll leave. So how do I know if I'm having a client do enough? Now, if you're not a personal trainer, or if you are, you can apply this, but if you're not a personal trainer, you would just ask yourself, am I doing enough? How do I know I'm doing enough in training? I want to make sure I'm not overdoing it, but I want to make sure I'm also pushing myself to do enough that I can achieve what I need. In general, you want a person to always feel, not always, I guess teetering back and forth between feeling, man, I'm crushing everything, and this is a little bit of a stretch right now. Meaning it's pushing them, but then if they get pushed too hard, you're going to pull back the throttle. It's a little dance. It's a dance with, am I pushing my body to make adaptations and progress, but not getting burned out or overwhelmed or overexhausted. So we're trying to balance overtraining and under recovery. So the client and I talked about what we would track. So we talked about 7 components that we would track in order to have a good idea of where a person is in that dance, in that balance. So then we know, do we need to adjust our nutrition? Do we need to adjust our training? Do we need to keep those the same and just adjust other factors that might be contributing? They want to know, how do I know I'm doing enough, but not too much? So that's what we're going to talk about in today's podcast. What I have them track for their clients is calories, protein, sleep, daily and workout energy, the client's desire to train. Sometimes we don't track that with a specific scale, just kind of, what's their mood been like lately. And then training progressions. Are they improving in, weight, sets, reps, all that stuff? And their impact on their mental health and their life. And I'll get into that in a second. These are things that I would consider for all of my clients. And it's what I teach my personal training clients whenever we talk about this type of stuff. Like we do business development. This is the stuff we talk about along with other things, but this we talk about all the time. So nutrition education is something I help a lot of trainers with. I teach them how to teach their clients to eat properly for their goals. Because if we don't pay attention to nutrition, they're not going to get their goals. They're not going to reach them. Or if they are interested in nutrition, maybe they're going to use a nutrition other service, and then that trainer's missing out on, maybe some income potential, and or missing out on being able to control an element that is highly influential. Meaning, if they're using some other service, maybe that service has a different philosophy that doesn't match yours, and it's actually hindering the client's progress. How do you kind of navigate that? So the more you can keep the services quote unquote in-house, the more you can control all elements with the same viewpoint, the same perspective, the same mindset, the same approach. So things are all congruent. And that's very important. So when we look at this, if we think of that list again, is how do I know I'm doing enough? It's calories, protein, sleep, daily workout energy, desire to train, training progressions, and then impact on mental health and their life. How is their training impacting their life? Let's go ahead and look through this. Calories. If somebody is like pretty much everybody we work with, everybody I work with, they're going to have a calorie target, meaning a general range that we know is enough calories for what they need, but not too much. So enough to get the progression of fat loss if that's their goal, enough to get a progression of strength increase if that's their goal, enough to get a progression of muscle growth if that's their goal. We have a calorie range. If they're not meeting their calories, or they're not even tracking their calories, we do not want to make adjustments to training without knowing their calories. So for example, their training is going really well. I would not hurry up and bump up the intensity and the volume of their training. Maybe they're actually overeating. And you'd start to kind of see this because their body composition would change, and they would start to then complain they're gaining a little bit of fat or they're getting a little pudgy. So it does show up in other ways. But if somebody is overeating, they're going to have great energy, most commonly. They're going to make some really good progressions in training. So you're going to think, I'm just going to keep adding more volume, keep adding more intensity. But then all of a sudden they start gaining weight and gaining weight and gaining weight. Let's use an example of a female powerlifter. Maybe they compete at the 130, like maybe around 130 some pounds. So they're in the 132 pound weight class, something like that. And you're like, okay, well, their training's been going great. Their energy's been going good. Let's increase intensity. Let's increase volume. Let's push them a little bit. All of a sudden, they do a weigh-in. Maybe it's the first of the month they do a weigh-in, and they're 142 pounds. And you're like, oh, shit. That's not good. So then you're like, well, we need to eat less. So now you pull back the calories to get their weight back down into 130s. But here you had adjusted the training to those calories, those higher calories that put them at 140 something, right? So now you have this training that was based off of a high calorie demand, but you reduced the calories to try to get their weight down, but you didn't reduce training. Now there's a mismatch. They're going to get some like decreased energy. They're going to maybe not make some great progressions anymore. They're going to start to have a little bit of a nagging injury or issue in their shoulder, their elbow, their knee. They're going to become lethargic for training. Their desire for training goes down because now there's a discrepancy between the calories they're consuming and what their programming was like set for. It was set around the parameters of a higher calorie intake. So that's an example where we don't want to adjust training on unknown calories if the calories are too high. Now, if the calories are too low, they're not going to make training progressions. They're not going to make physique progression. And somebody's be like, I'm not seeing any change. Well, we certainly don't want to train more to try to produce more change if we don't know how much they're eating. So the first thing I have a person do is to track their calories for a couple days in a week, so that way we can see where they're at. And they might say, oh, holy crap, I started tracking my calories. I realized I wasn't eating enough. Great. Let's address that first. Let's not touch the training yet. Protein. Same kind of concept is if they're under eating protein, they're going to undersee their progress and recovery. And you want to address that before you would adjust training. So if they're feeling sore and beat up and you're like, man, I guess we got to reduce their training intensity or reduce their training volume, you want to know what they're consuming protein-wise first. If they're under-consuming their protein, they are going to under-recover. You don't want to reduce the training. You want to increase the protein, especially if there's room to increase the protein while staying within normal protein parameters of, say, 25 to 33% of their total intake. If they're under 25% protein, then I would increase protein before I would reduce training. Sleep. Sleep is extremely important in damn near everything. So if they're undersleeping or if they have a bad night or two of sleep, that's going to impact everything they do when they're awake. So we don't want to adjust training if somebody's saying, man, I'm feeling really lethargic. I just kind of don't have any interest to train today. Today was a shit day. I wasn't able to make any of my progressions. We don't want to say, geez, maybe I'm doing too much. Instead of 3 sets, let's drop down to 2 sets. Hey, let's switch this movement to this movement because it's less CNS stress. Don't do any of that until you first ask them, well, how's your sleep been? Because if you ask them how their sleep been, they might say, oh, yeah, I haven't had great sleep. I've had a really hard time getting to sleep lately. Well, let's think about some melatonin supplementation. Let's think about a nighttime routine that brings down stimulus sooner. Maybe they're just going through a lot of stress and we have to kind of wait through the stress period. There's a lot of components that we would adjust and account for before we would adjust training. Daily and workout energy. So if they report having poor workout energy, maybe they're mistiming their food. So maybe they're working out in the morning fasted, and they're like, I get into the workout, and I just die, I have no energy. No shit, you're not taking any fuel. You're running a machine without any fuel in it, it's going to feel like shit. So before we try to increase general food and say, well, maybe we're not eating enough, let's just eat 500 calories extra a day. Well, if they're eating that later in the day, it's not going to help workout performance. So you want to look at specific timing. We certainly don't want to be like, well, maybe we're doing too much training, let's break down the training if you're not feeling great. Maybe we're just doing too much in a session and that's why you don't feel good, like why you run out of energy. No, they're just not even eating any energy before the workout. So you want to take care of that first. If we look at desire to train, meaning, I have a training program, I'm eating healthy, but I just haven't been feeling like training lately. That can be related to sleep, that can be related to food, that can be related to stress, that can be related to a lot of factors in life. So we don't want to say like, well, maybe I'm just having them do too much in training. If I reduce the training, that'll help their desire more. No. Maybe they also just don't have any clear set goals at the moment and they're a goal-oriented person. So you want to go through the process of creating new goals, maybe some short-term goals to go with long-term goals. Often when people only have long-term goals, they burn out in the short run, so you want to create some short-term goals. Or if somebody only has short-term goals, they kind of lack this long-term vision, and that can demotivate them. So we want to look at food, sleep, protein, we want to look at stress, we want to look at do we have clear defined goals, all before we would adjust training. Then we think about the impact of training on their mental health and life. So maybe our training is demanding 2.5 hours, 5 days a week, and they just don't have that. So they're going into the gym, they're rushing really quickly through the workouts. It's causing them to just be like, this is awful. I can barely get this in. I'm having to skip stuff at the end of the workouts. I'm totally missing this day. I'm overwhelmed, I'm stressed, I'm burned out, I'm frustrated. Well then, yeah, let's reduce training. That might be a case where the training isn't matching their lifestyle. And this is common when trainers use pre-templated programming. Oh, okay, I have powerlifters, I'm going to have them do this. They're going to do a squat, bench, deadlift day on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and it's going to take 3 hours for them to do it. Well, that's not going to work for everybody's schedule. So you can't have pre-templated programming and then expect people to just shift their whole damn life around that. That's a bullshit method of being a trainer. So it's better to personalize the programming specific to their life schedule, their needs. And then training progressions. If they're not making training progressions, they're not being able to increase weight. They're not being able to increase reps. They're not being able to increase percentage of weight loads on max effort lifts. We got to look at all these elements. We got to look at calories, protein, sleep, even hydration, stress markers. We want to look at all these other factors that factor into recovery before we would then think that maybe we're overtraining them. Commonly, what looks like overtraining is associated more directly with under recovery. There is a recovery or adaptation marker that is not being met to the minimum, and that is causing the training to look like it's too much, meaning they're falling behind in their training, whether that's in progressions or mental attitude and daily energy. Typically, if we address recovery first, that is a better approach than adjusting their training when we don't even know what the recovery markers are, if we don't even know what they're eating, if we're not really paying attention to their protein, their sleep, or their hydration. Those factors will negatively impact whatever new training you decide to do. So if we don't control those factors first, whatever training changes you make will be a wash or a waste in the long run because you're going to run into the same problem. So we want to look at under recovery elements first. That's going to be calories, protein, sleep, daily and workout energy, desire to train, training progressions, and then the impact on their mental health and does it fit their life. Let's look at those things first. If those markers are consistent and they're improving, then the person's doing great. If the person isn't improving, they're not making progress towards their goals, let's look at these markers first before we adjust training. Awesome. So that's a quick and easy discussion on how do we kind of balance this mindset of, am I doing enough? Am I doing too much? Am I overtraining or am I under recovering? Awesome. If you have any questions, if you need anything, reach out. My email is brutalirongym@gmail.com. Our website is www.brutalirongym.com. If you like the podcast, please share the podcast. The more people that know about the podcast, the more people can be helped by it. And then if you want to support the podcast, you can do a donation on our website, or you can buy your supplements from NutriCost.com. That's where I buy mine. You can use the code BrutalIron10 for a 10% discount, and we get a 10% commission on anything you purchase. So it's a great way to give back to the podcast and get a great supplement at a great discount for yourself. If you like the information we share in the podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels. You can find us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.